This chimp and I are cousins. We share an ancestor who lived only 6 million years ago. Take off my suit and his hair and you'd find it hard to tell us apart. Our genes are pretty much the same. Maybe so. But where I can talk to camera, he communicates in grunts. And where my species rules the world, his still lives in trees.
I've already argued that the essential difference between ape and man is in our heads, or more precisely, our brains. But what is so special about the human brain that allows us to dominate the planet? Why are we so much better than any other animal at imitation, language, and culture? Until recently, such questions belonged to philosophers. But now it's scientists who are finding the answers. In this film, I'll look at parrots who can talk, and children who can't. At all-American cheerleaders and suicide bombers. And at viruses of the mind. Each of these things tells us something important about being human. An art gallery in Los Angeles. Among the paintings on display are 3 abstracts, recently bought at auction for £12,000.
The painter of these paintings is rather famous. He's been compared by some critics to Kandinsky, by others to Pollock. In his day, Picasso was a fan and so was Miro. Who was he? Well, his name was Congo, and he was a chimpanzee.
For several months, Congo showed a lot of interest in painting. Like a lot of people, he simply enjoyed himself playing about with brushes and colors.
In the 1950s, Congo was the most famous chimpanzee in the world. Encouraged to paint by the zoologist Desmond Morris, his paintings have been heralded as the pinnacle of simian aesthetics, good enough to fool even the most discerning eye.
I think that it's really bold. It's abstract art that someone knows what they're doing. And it does appear to have, it appears to be from the modern era. And
It does have
like
a lot of energy, doesn't it?
Yes, it's very strong. It's a very strong piece of work.
Very basic palette, limited.
Yes, and it's like, you know, even if you go in close, all the deliberate, painterly, you know, movement of the brushstroke, like the artist leaving this stuff, and if it was a prominent artist, then it would, you know, could be easily $500,000, or easily.
$500,000?
Yes.
Well, I can tell you that Picasso was an admirer of this chap.
Oh, okay. Well, it's probably, then you said it's from the 50s. It's probably a Pollock. Is it
Probably a Pollock?
Yes.
No.
It's not. Okay.
No. The artist, his name was Congo.
Congo.
Congo. And he was a chimpanzee.
Oh, chimpanzee. Really?
Absolutely.
Well, then it's not going to be $500,000, okay?
Congo's paintings are certainly pleasing to the eye. I wouldn't mind owning one of them myself. But are they art? The answer to that question is a resounding no.
What am I drawing? Can you see it?
Congo's work isn't art because it isn't part of a tradition. He just sat down and did what came naturally to him. But human artists are different. We're influenced by those around us.
What's the name of your chimpanzee?
Great masters are influenced by the cultural currents of their time. Children by the scribbles of their friends. Either way, the principle is the same.
You're striking chimpanzees.
We think of culture as being about originality, but it's not. It's really about imitation. And we are a relentlessly imitative species. You can see it when you've got a group of children around a table like this. They just can't resist copying each other, or me for that matter of fact.
Simon says, jump up and down. Simon says, bang your head.
Mimicry isn't confined to art.
Simon says, point at the
Children learn and play by copying each other.
Simon says, tap your nose. Simon says, march. Simon says, stand absolutely still and don't move. Because imitation comes so naturally to us all, and children do it so easily, we think it must be something simple. But it isn't. It requires an extraordinary big and clever brain to imitate. Imagine that you want to copy me doing this. You've got to watch that action, then transfer that, mentally, transfer that into doing something with your own arms that would look like, that do the same thing, that would look to somebody else to be similar. That, cognitively, is a very complex transformation. It's not surprising that other species can't do it. It requires a very clever brain. But because our brain's so good at it, we think of it as just a childish game, and we overlook how fundamental it is to what it is to be human.
So what about our cousins? Can chimpanzees learn by imitating each other? Do apes ape? At the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, researchers are trying to find out. This experiment involves a tube, a grape, and a hungry chimp called Yahaga. Yahaga wants the grape, but first she'll have to work out how to open the tube. Yahaga gets her grape. The task is then repeated. Yahaga has another tube to open. This time, however, a second chimp, Fifi, watches on. Yahaga, having learnt the trick of opening the tube, now does so easily. But now it's Fifi's turn. Will she have learnt anything from watching Yahaga? Apparently not. She seems to have no idea how to open the tube.
It's very odd when we watch chimpanzees doing tasks that we would do by imitation, because to us it comes so naturally. They can learn by reward and punishment, trial and error, but what they can't do at all easily is watch what someone else has done, steal, as it were, the benefits of somebody else's learning. They've got to do it themselves.
Fifi eventually works out how to open the tube, but she does it her own way, using her feet. It seems that the knack of imitation is something that has evolved since humans and chimps last shared an ancestor. Sometime during the last 6 million years, the human brain was rewired. But how? Surprisingly, the answer has something to do with cheerleaders and an autistic boy. Humans are relentless imitators. It's something that comes naturally to us. Well, most of us. Gabe is a 10-year-old Californian boy, and he's autistic.
So my mom took me to a hospital, and they said that I have Asperger. Part of it is about I do very good, well in stuff like math. But the other part is a type of a disability.
Asperger's syndrome is a relatively mild form of autism. But even so, Gabe finds it hard to cope with normal social situations.
He
doesn't seem to learn all the things that his peers learn just by being around each other. Just taking turns in a conversation, even playing, he just doesn't seem to get. Sometimes I think the level of joy that other kids get out of playing with each other, he definitely prefers to play alone.
Autism is a deeply obscure disorder. Damage to almost every part of the brain has at one time or another been implicated as a cause. A new idea, and I think it's quite a good one, is that it has something to do with things called mirror neurons.
Gabe, I'm gonna put on the cap, okay? Here we go. Feel just like a baseball cap on you here. All right, looking good. Snap it down.
The University of California, San Diego. Gabe has come here to have his brainwaves analyzed. I don't have Asperger's, but I'm wired up too.
Just keep opening and closing your hand until I tell you to stop.
We start with a simple gesture. It's just a test of hand-eye coordination, one to which autists and non-autists have much the same neural response. But the interesting bit comes when we are asked to watch a video of the same action. Where for most people, doing and watching an action produce very similar brainwaves, not so for Gabe. There's something wrong with his neural wiring. And rather amazingly, given the complexities of the brain, we may know just which neurons have gone wrong. They're called mirror neurons. Discovered only in the last decade, they are the neurons that fire whenever we watch or imitate an action.
For you to imitate somebody, you have to adopt that person's vantage point and enact the same scenario in your own brain. In other words, create a virtual reality environment of the other person's actions, even complicated actions, in your brain before you can execute them. In an autistic child, if you ask them to imitate somebody else's action, they have great difficulty because they're unable to put themselves in the other person's shoes. In other words, there was no mirror neuron activity. So we said maybe the key deficit in autistic children, the neural basis of autism, is a deficit in the mirror neuron system.
The idea that mirror neurons may explain the workings of the autistic mind is an exciting one. But what about the rest of us who are not autistic? What do mirror neurons do for us? We use them whenever we copy other people. In effect, they allow us to blur the distinction between doing and watching. So when Californian cheerleaders practice a new routine, they rely on their mirror neurons being in perfect working order.
Natalie's mirror neurons are firing in response to Onashay's, and Onashay's are firing in response to Natalie's. Kim's mirror neurons are firing too, and so are Tenny's. But what's really remarkable is that I'm just watching, and my mirror neurons are firing too.
Mirror neurons will do for psychology what DNA did for biology. Open up a whole host of different questions and approaches to these questions that have remained the province of philosophy for thousands of years, such as how do you emulate, what is imitation, questions of that nature which have remained very elusive.
Nowhere is the human capacity for imitation more obvious than when we talk. When we pick up an accent, acquire a dialect, or even learn a new language, we do so by copying people around us. It's something we're really rather good at, especially when we're young.
But is our ability to talk really so unique?
Meet Alex, one of the great linguists of the animal world.
You're a very good boy.
You're right.
What matter? What matter? What matter?
Paper.
That's right. This is paper. What matter is this?
Alex is an African grey parrot who lives at Boston's Brandeis University.
Good boy. Whoa. Good parrot. Okay. A little bit harder?
For nearly 30 years, he has been studied and trained by animal researcher Irene Pepperberg.
Can you tell me what color?
Like all parrots, Alex has a vocal system capable of producing human-like words.
Green.
Can you tell me what color is 7? What color is 7?
He's also a natural mimic.
Tell him what color.
Every word he utters, he's copied from Irene.
What color?
But what makes Alex so fascinating is that he can do more than just imitate. He seems to understand what words mean, even rather abstract ones, such as color and number.
How many, Keith?
2.
Good parrot. Good boy. Alex, what's different? What's different?
Color.
Good boy. Good parrot. Very good.
Nuts.
I tell you what, instead of a nut, how about a little bit of bread?
How does this compare to a human child? When does a human child acquire these concepts?
Some of this is about probably just 3 years old. Okay,
Right.
The labeling is pretty simple. Concepts of number a little bit older. We've got a number test here. We were talking about maybe a 4 or 5 year old child. Okay, Alex, can you look at the tray and tell me how many green wool? Can you tell me how many green wool? How many green wool? Come on, tell me, how many green wool? How many green wool? Then we'll go on to something more fun. How many green wool?
Come on, Alex.
You take the tray.
Shall I
and
take
ask
it?
him. Yes.
All right, Alex. Irena's gone away, and it's just the two of us. And you have to answer some questions. How many green wool? How many green wool? How many green wool? Okay, Alex, focus on the tray.
4.
Good boy.
4. Alex, that's brilliant. It took about 15 minutes, but you certainly got it.
Alex is clearly a remarkable animal, all the more so because his brain is the size of a walnut. He undoubtedly has some of the basic components of language, phonetics and symbolic association, but this is still far short of human language. For all his linguistic prowess, Alex can't do something that comes easily to any 3-year-old child.
On the tray. What color 3?
He can't form a sentence.
What color 3?
What color?
Alex.
A human language, any human language, has structure.
A human
It has nouns and verbs, adjectives and prepositions, and rules for how they are used to make meaningful sentences. These rules are called syntax, and using them, the number of things we can say is literally infinite.
Literally infinite.
Parrots clearly don't understand syntax. But what about great apes? They are much closer to us in evolutionary terms. If they could speak, would they speak in sentences?
Morning in Riverdale. Time for Nim to prepare for another day at Columbia University.
In the 1970s, linguistic researchers tried to answer this question by rearing a chimp like a human child. The chimp, called Nim, was raised on a diet of American Sign Language. Every day he was taken to Columbia University for an intensive regime of classes. The first results were promising. Nim learnt more than 100 signs. And he seemed to understand that the order in which they were used mattered. He could tell the difference between "you tickle me" and "me tickle you." He seemed to understand a simple kind of syntax. But on closer examination, it became apparent that the experiment was compromised. Nim's trainers, it turned out, were unconsciously prompting him to choose certain signs, a classic error in behavioral studies. The project was deemed a failure and abandoned. A very different approach was taken with a chimp called Lana. In order to eliminate experimental bias, her minders made her live in a sealed box and communicate her desires by computer. She was rewarded with food only if she pressed a series of buttons in the right order. The idea was that the computer would record her every word and so elucidate the basis of chimp language. The problem, obvious in retrospect, was that Lana, all alone in her box, had very little to talk about. And then came Kanzi.
I got the onions in a bowl. Let's go put them in our hot food and we'll come back and turn the TV on. Put your onions right here and put them in your bowl.
Kanzi is a bonobo born at a primate center in Atlanta.
Look, you spilled some of it.
Like Lana, he was brought up using a computerized keyboard. But unlike Lana, he has always lived in close contact with humans. The results have been impressive. He clearly understands the commands and instructions of his trainer, but the communication is all one way.
Yeah. Give Sue bananas.
Despite decades of training, Kanzi actually says very little.
Kanzi, give Sue ice. That's right.
He can answer basic questions, but he's unable to initiate a conversation in the way that a human child does very naturally.
Can you hear me, Kanzi? Give the doggy a shot.
Chimps can certainly learn signs or symbols for bananas, for pails, for carrying, for throwing, for putting, and so on.
Good job.
They can pay attention somewhat to the order in which they're used, the difference between put banana, apple, or put apple, banana. But in comparison with what a child can do, it's still fairly rudimentary.
Put the key in the refrigerator.
Part of the thrust of this effort was to shrink the evolutionary gap between humans and other animals. Part of it was attempting to elevate the status, even the moral status of animals, and it's very much tied to the animal rights movement. And so with this mixture of motives, it's not so easy to assess the scientific relevance of this work.
Go get the ball that's outdoors.
Especially since it involves the great enthusiasm of some researchers.
Good job. Okay, thank you.
One of whom I heard at a scientific conference predict that within a number of years, the chimpanzee itself would be giving the talk. Now, I'd be willing to make a bet that that will never happen.
Could you take my shoe off, please? You might need to untie it.
No matter how much some people might wish it otherwise, it seems that humans, and only humans, have the ability to produce an infinite variety of meaningful sentences from a finite number of words. It's something we are all born with, a language instinct.
But how has this instinct evolved? It's a question that we've been asking for more than 100 years. And were just beginning to find some answers with the help of this boy.
My brain is trolling me not to talk very well. My brain.
Paris, circa 1860. Paul Broca, physician and anthropologist, was pursuing his fascination with skulls and brains. But there is one brain in which he was particularly interested. This one. It belonged to a Monsieur Le Borgne who, as a young man, had suffered an epileptic fit that had rendered him all but speechless. Indeed, he could only say one word, tan, and for the next 21 years of his life, he said it over and over again, tan, 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 tan. When Le Borgne died, Broca removed his brain and found a severe lesion in the left-hand side of the frontal lobe. The lesion is still visible today, right here. Broca made the obvious inference. This is where human speech originates in the brain. Ever since, this part of the brain has been known as Broca's area. Broca's discoveries started a debate about the evolutionary origins of human language. One notable for its lack of evidence. While bones fossilize, speech leaves no trace in the earth. The Linguistic Society of Paris banned all further speculation on the subject as fruitless.
And yet, given that language did evolve, there's one place where traces of its past might be found, and that is in our genes.
West London, circa 1990. Clinical researchers discovered a large extended family with a rare speech disorder. Known to scientists as the K family, their symptoms were similar to those of Broca's patient, Monsieur Le Borgne. Like him, they had a problem articulating words. They also made simple grammatical errors.
Where do you live, Laura?
May I show it? It's best font. May I 6. I name him Pablo. And my eye is 9.
Duck.
Whereas Monsieur Le Borgne's speech problems were caused by brain damage, the K family were born this way. They had a mutation in one of their genes.
Hey, have you had a blood test done before?
If scientists could find it, they would find a gene that was clearly important to the development of language.
We're going to take the DNA and we're going to see if we can follow the gene for the speech problem in your family.
Yeah, how long does it take then?
Well, it's going to take us a long time.
There are about 25,000 genes in the human genome, but they are buried within 3 billion letters, nucleotides of DNA. In the K family, one of those letters was wrong, and finding it is roughly equivalent to finding a single printer's error in all these books.
The task of finding the K family's faulty gene was given to a young geneticist from Oxford, Simon Fisher.
When you start searching for something like this, you have no idea where this damaged gene may lie, or even if there really is a gene involved. So it's really pot luck when you start out whether you're going to find anything or not. The first stage was to collect all the DNA samples from everyone who was affected and unaffected in the family, and then we analysed this DNA looking for sections of chromosomes that were inherited by all the affected people but not by the unaffected people. And this enabled us to zoom in on one section, which was on chromosome 7, where we thought the damaged gene must lie. And this is quite a big step because we were able to exclude maybe 90–95% of the genome. There was very strong evidence from what we'd done so far that there really was something there. There was something lurking inside there. So I kind of had a gut feeling that we would find it eventually.
In the late 90s, Fisher's team had a breakthrough. They discovered an unrelated boy with the same speech disorder. His name was Christian Stark.
Something goes matter with my voice because my brain is trolling me not to talk very well. My brain. And that. I get mixed up. I do. I get really mixed up because I have this kind of effusion with me about effusion. Is that right? Yeah, it is.
Who's going first this time?
Me.
Go on then.
It's something that eats cheese. It's not a rat or a hamster or it's a bit like it's a kind of, it's slow.
Young Christian's linguistic problems are remarkably similar to those of the KE family. Sure enough, when his genome was analyzed, he too had an abnormal chromosome 7. But in his case, the chromosome was broken at one particular gene. After 5 years of searching, geneticists had found what they were looking for.
Christian Stark's DNA was the key to finding the faulty gene. It was rather like finding a convenient bookmark that flagged not only the right book, but the exact location of the printer's error. The faulty gene had been found. It was called FOXP2.
FOXP2 is a very special kind of gene. It encodes a protein that binds to DNA. In doing so, it turns many other genes on and off. It's a master control switch, and when it's faulty, lots of things go wrong. Given the parallels between Christian Stark, the KE family, and Broca's patient Monsieur Leborn, it's clear that FOXP2 directly affects Broca's area. As such, it controls our ability to articulate words and use grammar. Human language is so complex that it must have needed the evolution of many genes. But FOXP2 is the first we've found. Other animals have the same gene. Chimps certainly do. But at some point in our recent evolutionary past, our ancestors acquired a uniquely human version of the gene. One that probably helped us talk. And as the genes for language assembled in our genome, everything changed. For millions of years, our ancestors had been cultural conservatives. They'd worked out how to make simple stone tools and, having done so, stuck with what they had. But with the evolution of language, they became cultural radicals. Painting caves, making ornaments, inventing new tools. Archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward. This isn't hyperbole. We've gone from stone tools to mobile phones in merely 40,000 years. invention of culture was a new way of transmitting information. All animals transmit genetic information to their offspring, but humans also transmit cultural information. We transmit memes.
The word meme sounds rather odd, but it's just a unit of culture. An idea, any idea that one person gets from another. And like genes, some memes spread and flourish while others go extinct. Their fates dictated by culture red in tooth and claw.
A meme is any kind of information that is copied in culture. So whenever imitation or copying in culture goes on, that's memes being passed on. And that includes everything from the really important things like financial institutions, scientific theories, wearing clothes, to trivial things like, you know, tying your scarf in a particular way or wearing a baseball cap back to front. They're all memes, the whole lot. In modern, advanced societies, we are bombarded with memes from the moment we wake up. So our job as meme machines is really to be selective imitators, constantly having to choose which bits are we going to remember, which bits are we going to pass on.
A modern bookshop is a mimetic battlefield. Each year, thousands of new books are published, all competing for limited space in our brains. We have to make choices about which books to buy and read. And one way we do that is by buying what other people are buying.
Think about bestsellers. Are they really so good? It would be lovely to believe that we buy the books that we do based upon their literary merit, but sadly it isn't so. Bestsellers are largely an example of the madness of crowds. Some people buy a book. It gets noticed, it gets on the bestseller list. More people buy it. A chain reaction ensues. And before you know it, the thing has spread through the population like a virus.
Social psychologists have long recognized that humans have an innate need to copy and conform. There are classic experiments that demonstrate it.
Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. Do you think the correct answer?
In this test, the volunteer doesn't know that everyone else in the room is an actor and has been primed to give the wrong answers.
You'll be third, and so on. Okay, let's begin with the first set of
Will he believe his own eyes or conform to the group?
1. 1. 1.
2.
1. 3. 3.
3.
3.
On average, a third of people in such tests conform to the views of the group.
3.
3.
Advertisers know all about the power of social conformity. To exploit it, they've invented something called viral marketing.
If you get socially infectious people to adopt your product, all their friends are likely to adopt it. And so you actually market to people without marketing. You actually market through the copycat effect and through word of mouth. So imagine, for example, you want to sell a new electronic game. You'd come down to a skate park, you identify a cool kid and ask that cool kid, who's the coolest kid here? And that kid would look around and say, it's him over there. You'd walk over to that kid, you'd ask them the same question, who's the coolest kid here? And what you do is you keep asking this question and you'd climb the local hierarchy of kid cool until you got to one kid who said, me, I'm the coolest kid here. And then what you would do, instead of trying to sell them the product, you'd actually give them the product for him or her to hand out to their friends. In doing so, what you'll do is you'll kickstart a whole copycat fad where your product will spread like a virulent virus through the population.
Does viral marketing really work? There's certainly no evidence that it does. But it's an idea that is spreading nevertheless. One might even say that it's a viral meme itself. We believe we are rational creatures making rational choices. Yet so much of what we do simply because others are doing it. And in a way, there's nothing wrong with this. Our ability to copy and transmit memes must ultimately be good for us. Without it, human culture would not exist.
But the tyranny of memes contains a terrible irony, that the very devices that enable us to absorb them so effortlessly and enrich our lives far beyond anything our apish ancestors ever had, also leave us profoundly vulnerable to altogether nastier memes. To memes that want to destroy us.
As emergency vehicles rushed to the scene of the bombings, the scale of the carnage became clear.
On the 7th of July 2005, 4 young men killed themselves in London. In doing so, they killed another 52 innocent people. Horrified, we asked the obvious question, one we've asked too many times before. Why did they do it? One can talk of jihad and the clash of civilizations. But such answers don't address the sheer strangeness of suicide.
From an evolutionary point of view, their behavior is utterly perplexing. We are animals, and like all animals, are machines designed for the transmission of genes, our genes.
And yet suicide bombers violate this Darwinian imperative to survive and reproduce. Why? An answer can be found in an 18th century German novel. A novel so dangerous that it had to be banned.
The book is called The Sorrows of Young Werther, and it was written in 1774 by Germany's greatest writer, Johann Wolfgang Goethe. It is the story of a young man, Werther, who is besotted with a dark-eyed beauty, Lotte, who is regrettably betrothed to a dullard, Albert. Were you to read it, you would be hard-pressed to see the danger. It is, after all, just a tale of unrequited love.
Werther's story reaches its climax. It's December, cold and bleak. An exasperated Lotte finally sends him away. His response is to order his affairs, borrow Albert's dueling pistols, and write his final letters. Farewell, he says. Farewell, farewell, farewell. They go on for 20 pages. He cocks his pistol, raises it to his forehead, and he shoots.
The story of young Werther was extremely popular and contagious. All across Europe, young men read it, succumbed to romantic passion, and, when it all went wrong, killed themselves in emulation of their hero.
The Sorrows of Young Werther eventually fell from fashion, but the phenomenon persists. Even today, when an especially prominent suicide is reported, a wave of copycat suicides often follows. Social scientists even have a name for it. They call it the Werther effect.
You can see the Werther effect at work on today's suicide terrorists. They are primed with a cocktail of toxic ideas, that martyrdom is glorious, that the afterlife will be one of delirious pleasure, that they are a band of brothers. But the most powerful impulse, the trigger, is the example of others who have died before them. Such is the power of imitation.
This series has been about what makes us human. As such, it may seem odd, even perverse, to conclude it with a discussion of suicide. After all, very few of us will ever find ourselves so enthralled by an idea as to want to die for it. But suicide is merely a symbol of a very human condition, of our strange ability to persuade ourselves to do things that our minds and our bodies clearly were not adapted, to do things that are manifestly not in our evolutionary interests.
This carriage contains about 30 women. If they are typical, 6 of them will never have children. They will not transmit their genes to future generations. In effect, they will commit genetic suicide. This behavior has become so common that we take it for granted. Yet it's unprecedented in the history of our planet. And why do they do it? Because they too have been primed with a cocktail of ideas. That work is fulfilling, that consumer goods are desirable, that childbirth can be delayed. Ideas that have been spreading across the Western world since the Industrial Revolution. And herein lies the paradox of human evolution. The very things that make us so special, culture, imitation, language, are the very things removing us from the evolutionary stage. We alone among the animals can step beyond our biology. Perhaps it is this that truly makes us human.